Welcome, everybody. It's not too late to grab food, so you guys are okay back there. But I think I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about what's going on. My name's David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's great to have you here. For those of you who haven't been here before, the Mitchell Center is a place that really believes in the value of stakeholder-engaged, solutions-driven, interdisciplinary research, and today's talk is going to be a really interesting example of that. But before I get to that, I want to tell you about a few other things that are coming up. So a week from Thursday, Senator Mitchell will be here over in Houck Auditorium giving a talk that, even though many of you are probably interested in science, it may turn out that even scientists have to pay attention to the health of our democracy, and the talk he's giving is titled Healing Our Democracy. It's likely to, I don't think he's ever spoken on this subject before, so it could be quite interesting. If you're interested, you can go to our website, you can get tickets, they're free, but we may be standing room only before we're done there, so get them ahead of time, please. Next Monday at this time, we have a talk every Monday from 3 to 4. They're all kind of in this space that I mentioned, kind of working with partners, many different facets to the problem, and how do we not just produce new knowledge but help solve real-world problems. Really interesting talk by Sarah and Bryce Hawk. They're down in Portland, but they've got a really interesting background before that. They have a company called Food for Thought, and they actually do food tours in Portland. I'm sure you're all aware that the food scene in Portland is pretty cool, but this isn't your ordinary food tour. They are really trying to tell stories about Maine's food system, which is itself a really complicated sustainability system, and for all I know, we'll have some seaweed parts to the story in there somewhere, so feel free to come back for that. Today, you probably don't know that somewhere up in the ether is a virtual audience joining us today. We've got the kind of system that allow people to listen to these talks anywhere in the world. And today, people who contacted us, I assume they're listening, and if they are, welcome, include folks who have companies like Source Maine that does seaweed-based micronutrients are in the virtual audience. Oh, cool. In the back row, too. Thank you, welcome. It's great to have you here. The Maine Seaweed Council and some folks from Cooperative Extension, a close colleague, Esperanza Stancioff, and I think a few others there. So, and somebody down at the Darling Center, maybe more than one. So anyway, it's a bigger audience than you realize, and it's great that that's possible, and we're glad to have the kind of mixing that takes place when you get people from the private sector, from NGOs, from government and academics together. That's a big part of the way we approach this kind of work. Just a little bit about Amanda Klemmer, the speaker today. She's an assistant research professor in food web ecology over in the School of Biology and Ecology, one of my favorite schools on campus, but that's also my home department. And she's a really stellar food web ecologist. If you kind of look at the path of her career, it's really taken her to interesting places working with, I think, amazing people. Her undergraduate degree was from Allegheny College north of Pittsburgh, and I'm really jealous when I realized that while she was there, she not only did research in the forests of Pennsylvania, but also out in the Colorado and the Rocky Mountains and in the southern Alps of New Zealand. So if you're an undergraduate and you didn't get to do all that stuff, you can join me in being jealous of Amanda. Worked with really great people all along the way, did her master's at the University of British Columbia and a PhD at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. One of the things I heard Amanda give a short version of this talk, I don't know, some time ago, at a Sea Grant thing, and I had to leave early, so I definitely wanted to hear the rest of the story. But I admire the way she and her colleagues are using their expertise, a lot of it, in her case, in terms of ecology, but bringing a lot of pieces together to work with stakeholders on such an important and multifaceted problem. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Amanda. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me. This is my first talk as a PI on a project, which is super exciting and also a little bit weird for me because a lot of the work I'm going to be presenting to you today is from all of the students and collaborators from our project. So I'm just going to thank them from the very beginning, but you'll be seeing the lovely faces throughout the whole talk. So first I wanted to ask everyone, who in here has heard of rockweed? A lot. Okay, awesome. So rockweed is a really important industry and fishery within the state of Maine. And it's become more and more in the public eye in recent years because of a really contentious court case that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. But basically, it is this really cool intersection between the public, the industry, and science and conservation. And so I feel really lucky to be here in the state of Maine where it's really easy to do awesome science while working on issues that are cared about by all the people of Maine. So what is rockweed? Rockweed is a fucoid algae, and it grows all along the coast of Maine from the New Hampshire border all the way up to the Canadian border. It has a lot of common names that you might have heard before, such as Norwegian kelp, knotted kelp, knotted rack, or egg rack. And likely if you've ever been on a beach in Maine, you've either seen this attached within the natural habitat or washed up on shore in the rack line. And its most distinctive feature are these little bits here that I remember when I was a kid, I always used to go up to them and burst all the little bubbles. But rockweed grows in the rocky intertidal zone all along the coast of Maine, and it grows in the rocky intertidal zone because it attaches itself to rocks using these holdfasts. And just so everyone's on the same page, the intertidal zone is basically from the point of low tide to the point of high tide. And so it encompasses this really interesting, diverse habitat. The subtidal zone is where things like kelp grows, and then this supratidal zone is where you might see a lot of that rockweed that is washed up onto the beach as rack. And just so you can orient yourself as to what that looks like on the actual beaches of Maine, here's one of the beaches of Maine, and here's the low tide zone and high tide zone, and here's a whole bunch of rockweed growing within that habitat. So rockweed is a really, really cool organism. It is an algae, and I apologize to everyone out there if I accidentally call it a plant at some point. I, as a food web ecologist, often get my algae and plants confused, so I apologize, but it is an algae, and the individuals create a lot of interesting, diverse habitats, both during high tide and low tide. During high tide, it creates this vertical structure that provides habitat for a lot of organisms. And then during low tide, it lays itself across the rocks on these beaches and almost provides protection for a lot of the organisms that might be living amongst it. So during low tide, there's a lot of invertebrates that are found there. Things like crabs, barnacles, snails. And then there's also some larger organisms that use this habitat a lot, such as shorebirds and scavengers. During high tide, besides all those invertebrates that were just in the last picture, there's also fish that use this habitat, and you can kind of see the tiny little dots in the water there. That's a whole school of fish swimming amongst this rockweed. And then also diving birds like eiders. So rockweed's been harvested in Maine since the 1970s. And it's a very established industry on the coast. It supports a lot of smaller communities, and about 95% of the seaweed that's harvested within Maine by weight is rockweed, which was really surprising to me. When I first started working on this issue, I actually had not heard of rockweed being a major industry within Maine, but it really is a big part of our seaweed harvest along the coast. And there's a bunch of different ways that it's harvested up and down the coast. There's hand harvesting with knives, there's rake harvesting. I had this awesome video of rake harvesting happening, but it didn't download properly, so I apologize for that. But basically it looks like a garden rake that you would rake your leaves in your backyard, and these harvesters do all the hard work, standing on a boat, throwing the rake out and pulling it in, harvesting tons and tons of rockweed. So it's a lot of manual labor. And then there's also mechanical harvesters that go along and harvest the rockweed on these boats. I said earlier this is kind of a contentious issue in Maine at the moment, and that's mainly because of this court case, Ross versus Acadian sea plants. And basically what happened was some landowners decided that they weren't really happy with the rockweed harvesting happening outside of their doorstep. And so they wanted to challenge the industry to try to get it so that the industry had to seek landowner permission to harvest the rockweed on their property. And law dating back to the colonial days basically states that landowners own to the high tide line and they don't own whatever's happening within that intertidal zone. And so a big part of this court case is trying to decide who does own that intertidal zone and if rockweed can actually be considered a plant and therefore you should seek landowner permission, or if it's more like a fish or a bivalve like clams or mussels that you don't need landowner permission and you can harvest that fish within that intertidal zone. Right now there's actually an appeal out on this court case, and originally it was decided towards the landowners saying that companies would need to seek landowner permission, but at the moment it's up in the air because of this appeal. So before this court case happened, back in 2014, the Department of Marine Resources, or DMR, got a rockweed working group together to try to come up with a fisheries management plan to help manage this rockweed fishery along the coast of Maine. There were a whole bunch of people that were involved in this rockweed working group. There was the Maine Coast Heritage Trust, faculty from UMaine, Machias, and Orono. Dr. Susan Brawley, who just walked in, was a part of the working group. There was the industry involved, so all of the major rockweed harvesters in Maine were a part of the working group, the Department of Marine Resources itself, and then also the Nature Conservancy representing conservation agencies. And as a part of this working group, they came up with the Rockweed Fisheries Management Plan, and there were 3 things that they posed within that management plan that were needed for further research in Maine that me and my collaborators working on the science behind this thought we could really help try to answer some of these major questions that were still out there about rockweed harvest in Maine. So some of these questions are, how does the structural change from harvest benefit / detract from the habitat? How does the architecture of rockweed affect associated species? And will cumulative effects of successive harvests restructure habitat and or ecosystems? So we got together as scientists to look at this issue from a very unbiased standpoint. You know, rockweed harvest is happening in Maine. It's supporting a lot of the communities, a lot of the harvesters. There's a lot of landowners, obviously, that think that it might be an issue. But as scientists, it's really important to come at it with a very unbiased standpoint and just ask scientific questions and try to answer them to the best of your ability. So the questions that we were really interested in is, how does rockweed harvesting affect biotic and abiotic food web characteristics within this rocky intertidal zone all along the coast of Maine? So the first way that we hypothesized is that rockweed could affect bottom-up processes. It does provide a lot of habitat and food for a lot of the invertebrates and other higher organisms like fish and birds that live within this habitat. So it could be that by that altering that rockweed, it creates a cascade up the food web to affect all the organisms. But then, because there are these complex interactions happening with top predators like birds within the ecosystem, there could also be some interesting top-down effects if some of those birds aren't in the ecosystem anymore. And then lastly, because rockweed is, creating structural habitat and heat protecting habitat during high and low tide, we hypothesize that rockweed harvest could potentially also affect things like temperature, light, and wave intensity, or these abiotic conditions within the ecosystem. So to investigate all these questions, we put together the CRASH team, or the Conserving Rockweed Animal Systems for Sustainable Harvest. And it's me, as well as Brian Olson and Jessica Mullen from Maine Maritime Academy. Hannah Weber from the Scudic Institute is doing her PhD work on this project. She very much is awesome in her own right, and then luckily is doing a PhD with us, which we're very happy about. And then we also have these two great master students on the project, Elliot Johnston and Hannah Middlestat. And any of the harvesters out there that have been working with us, those are likely the awesome smiling faces that you've been working with throughout the project, because they really are doing the grunt work on the ground. And we came up with this acronym. You know, it's always fun to come up with fun acronyms. And then our colleague Jesse got an email from someone frantically saying, I saw a flyer saying that rockweed is crashing in Maine. So maybe it wasn't the best acronym, but we as a team like to think of it more and channel the smooth vibes of Dave Matthews and think of it as crashing into me, you know. All right, so our main objectives on the crash team for the science behind our work as well as the stakeholder engagement is, one, to characterize the role of rockweed architecture and biomass in intertidal food webs using coast-wide surveys. It has been a lot of great science done in the rockweed habitat in Maine and as well as in Canada, but unfortunately, as we all know, in ecology and science, the answer is often, you know, it depends on where you are, what effects you're going to see, and so we're really trying to encompass the whole Maine coast with our research. Then we want to determine the response of non-target coastal resources, so things like invertebrates and birds, to current harvesting practices with manipulative field experiments. And last, it was really important to us to actually engage all of the stakeholders in this process to try to help assess the implications of the harvest on these non-target species for rockweed policy and management moving forward. So first we're going to start with our first objective, which was just characterizing what these rockweed habitats look like all up and down the coast of Maine. And this was started back in 2016 with master student Amy Barron. She's currently in the finalizing writing up stages. I'm sure she wishes she was back out there actually doing the sampling. But she did this massive field effort from the New Hampshire border all the way up to the Canadian border and looked at over 60 sites in 2016 and 2017 and to see what birds were living in this rockweed habitat. And just a quick snapshot of some preliminary results that she's found. We basically found that the rockweed is positively associated with terrestrial bird foragers, so things like purple sandpipers and scavengers like gulls and crows. And basically, their numbers increase as the tide goes out. So you can imagine a tide going out, the rockweed falling over, lots of little invertebrates are still crawling around in there, lots of yummy food. And so these shorebirds and scavengers can come in and eat those invertebrates as the tide falls out in the rockweed habitat. Interestingly, we saw that for the aquatic foragers, so these are things like eiders that dive down to get their food off of the ocean floor while the tide is up, that they weren't actually positively associated with rockweed. They were associated with a closely related species called fucus, and you've probably also seen that on the coast of Maine. It basically looks like rockweed, but it's a lot shorter and kind of has flatter, not leaves. Again, this is where fronds. Thank you. I'm calling upon Jesse in the audience. Yeah, flatter fronds. And so those birds are around this habitat as the tide's rising, so as that water is coming in. We have Hannah Middlestat and Elliot Johnston out there doing a lot of surveys, so continuing those bird surveys and also doing invertebrate and rockweed biomass surveys. Amy did a lot of her focus on surveying during summer, but we're really interested in seeing what's happening in this habitat during all points in the year, so also getting some winter surveys in there as well. And then Hannah Weber has been working on this really interesting question on what the invertebrates are doing during high tide within this habitat. It's really easy to go out there during low tide, put a quadrat down, like in this previous picture, and count all the invertebrates that you can find within a known area within this rockweed habitat, but a lot harder to find out what's happening there during high tide. So Hannah, being a creative genius that she is, devised this really awesome method using the little fabric tunnels that you can buy for toddlers to crawl around in your house. So Hannah basically goes out there during low tide and puts one of these tunnels around a rockweed. And then during high tide, goes out on a paddleboard, releases the little tunnel, it pops up and encloses one whole rockweed individual within the tunnel. And then you can zip tie it off and do some diving down to cut off the rockweed from the base and bring it back to shore and see all the little critters that were living within that rockweed plant during high tide. Another thing that we're doing to try to characterize what's happening within this food web is looking at purple sandpiper poop in winter. How much fun! So a new and upcoming way to figure out what an organism is actually eating within a food web is to do fecal metagenomics. So you take a sample of their poop, basically, and send it off to get sequenced, and you can see what types of organisms it had been eating in the recent past. And so Elliot Johnston and Hannah Middlestat went out in winter, and this is a major part of Elliot's master's thesis. So he gets to go around on the coast in winter in the freezing temperatures and wears life suits just in case he falls in, so he's nice and safe, and scrapes bird poop off of the rocks to try to figure out what these terrestrial foragers or the shorebirds are eating in this rockweed zone. Hannah Weber is also really interested in the architecture of the rockweed. Rockweed are these beautiful, complex algae, and as they get disturbed, whether it be via harvest or ice scour, they grow in really new and different, interesting ways. And so Hannah's going all up and down the coast and harvesting individuals of rockweed, lying them out on these white sheets, taking pictures of them, and then getting their fractal dimensions to try to figure out how the actual structure of these rockweed individuals is affecting the organisms living within the food web. And then last, as a part of the survey, we're also really interested in looking at the abiotic variables that this rockweed might be affecting within the intertidal zone. And Hannah Weber's spearheading this part of the project with Chris Peterson at College of the Atlantic. And they're going in Frenchman Bay and put out a whole bunch of temperature and light loggers called hobos within patches that have rockweed and patches that are bare rock. And their first question is, how is the presence or absence of rockweed affecting these important abiotic variables like temperature and light? So first we're going to talk about light. You can imagine light would be really important not only for the rockweed itself, but for a lot of the other algae that might be living on the bottom of the rocks, and also for some of those organisms that are crawling around there as well. So I have some graphs up here and I'll slowly walk you through them. First we're looking at light measured in lux, and just note that this is a natural log scale. So these bars are a lot closer than they would be if we were looking at the raw lux values. But on the left here we have the winter, and on the right here we have the summer. So this is averages of a bunch of different sites in the winter from these loggers, and averages of a bunch of different sites from these loggers in the summer. The green bars are the areas where these loggers were attached under rockweed individuals, and the gray bars are areas where they're attached in bare rock. The first thing we found was that rockweed blocks out light during high and low tide, which is maybe seems really intuitive to you, but until you get to the science, you never know. So the presence of that rockweed is going to be affecting other individuals in the food web and their ability to get light. The really interesting results come in when you look at temperature. And we basically found that at high tide, so when the water is up in the rockweed habitat, there is no effect of rockweed versus bare rock on the temperature within this habitat. But interestingly, during low tide, rockweed actually decreases the temperature of this habitat in both summer and winter. We originally hypothesized that in winter, this rockweed laying on the rocks would almost act as a blanket, kind of keeping that habitat maybe a little bit warmer. But because it is blocking out so much of the light, it really is decreasing the temperature during low tide. And you can see that that effect is really large during the summer and still there during the winter, but a lot lower of an effect. So our next objective was to determine the response of these non-target coastal resources in light of the current harvesting practices that are happening up and down the coast of Maine. And so to do this, we designed a before-after control impact experiment. And before-after control impact, or BACI experiments, are used a lot with disturbances to habitats like this. And luckily, we've gotten the opportunity to work with a lot of the harvesters, and so we really can control when this disturbance is happening to really see how it is altering these habitats all up and down the Maine coast. So Elliot and Hannah, again, have been spearheading this part of the project. So all the harvesters out there, thank you so much, and thank you for working with them. We really appreciate it, and they've had such a great time working with the industry on this. So for our timeline for this part of the project, in the spring we were working on actually contacting the harvesters and getting a hold of them, and then doing some site selection. And that site selection is still ongoing in parts of Maine. And we've started the before surveys, so looking at these habitats before a harvest is going to happen. The harvest will happen next year in late spring through summer, and then we're going to do after surveys at the exact same time of year to see if this harvesting is having any impact on this food web. So our original design, when we came up with this idea, was to have no harvest areas, then an area that was 8-inch harvest, so below the current regulations. The current regulations for rockweed harvest along the coast of Maine is 16 inches from the holdfast. And so we wanted to see if you basically cut that in half, how it was affecting the food web. But this is why stakeholder engagement is so important when you're doing applied science. Us as scientists came up with this awesome design, which we thought was awesome. And then Hannah and Elliot went and talked to a lot of the harvesters, and they said, we're never going to be able to know that we're getting down to 8 inches. It's kind of a silly treatment for the experiment because it's not going to be practical in real life applications of rockweed harvest. And so they came back to us and said, well, why don't we just do our normal rockweed harvesting procedures, and there's normally a gradient of total biomass that's harvested from the ecosystem. And so now we've moved from this very defined 16 inches and 8 inches as treatments to having a gradient of total biomass that's harvested from the ecosystem. And again, this was all based on harvester feedback, just highlighting the importance of working with stakeholders throughout this whole process. So Elliot and Hannah have been in contact with a lot of the major rockweed harvesters all up and down the coast of Maine. So Source, which is way down in southern Maine near the New Hampshire border, Ocean Organics, North American Kelp, and then Acadian Sea Plants, which is up near the Canadian border. And they're actually a Canadian company. Canada's a country. They are a Canadian company that moved down and started harvesting in Maine in the 1990s. So now our design, thanks to the helpful input of the harvesters, is that in 2018 we're out there harvesting the before sites, and we have about 23 control sites and 23 impact sites. Those numbers are going to go up and down depending on exactly what site information we get back from the harvesters. And then in 2019 the harvesters are going to go out there and harvest our sites that we designated as the impact sites. And so we'll have a before-after control impact design here where we can see what's happening in time and in space with this rockweed harvesting. And they're out there doing the hard yards right now. I think they worked all weekend trying to do these surveys. All of a sudden, things happen so fast, and we had to get the surveys done, and we need to get it done before winter happens because it's really hard to sample these habitats in winter. And so Hannah and Elliot every weekend have been going out to try to collect our before data on the birds, invertebrates, and rockweed biomass itself. And they've had a lot of help from undergraduate here in marine sciences, Stephen Held, who's been helping us all summer and hopefully into the future doing lots and lots of fun invertebrate lab work. So our third objective for this project was to do with actually engaging all the different stakeholders in this process. And again, this was really important to us because as scientists, we need to remain unbiased, but it's really important to actually get the viewpoint of all of the different people involved when you're doing something as applied as rockweed harvest. So we're currently in the process of planning a stakeholder listening session, which is going to get a whole bunch of stakeholders involved in this process together in a room to talk about what science they believe that they need to make informed management decisions, as well as advising us on our science. Like we said, those harvesters that gave input to Hannah and Elliot, that was invaluable input from them earlier in our planning process for this experiment. And so having all these stakeholders in a room helping us design our future resource was really important to us. So we're trying to get this together for November 2018, and we've been working with a lot of the Maine Sea Grant people. Their extension team is awesome, and hopefully they will help us lead a productive stakeholder meeting. But we're working with a lot of the industry folks, a lot of the conservation government folks, so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Maine IFNW, the National Park Service. There's some NGOs, non-government organizations involved in it. And we're also trying to get some public groups as well so that we really can get the viewpoint of everyone involved. A big part of this project, besides gathering the science, is actually disseminating that science to the public. Maine Sea Grant a few years ago made this awesome rockweed fact sheet, and so as we get new up-to-date science on what's happening within these ecosystems, we plan on updating this rockweed fact sheet so that it can be available for the public with all the new up-to-date information on the science. And then lastly, we really wanted to do a big symposium at the end of this research to inform all of our awesome stakeholders that have been working with us, as well as the public, onto our findings and some other research and public engagement things that have been happening around the rockweed topic. In 2010, there was a rockweed symposium here at UMaine, and so we're planning a 2020 follow-up rockweed symposium. So please look out for that. Everyone is going to be welcome, and we'd really love to have as diverse as our stakeholder group is, a diverse representation from the public and the university sphere as well. And I see some of my students in this room, they're probably super embarrassed I saw all these pictures online. But the awesome part about doing research at a university is not only do you get to involve all these stakeholders and the public, but you also get to involve undergraduate research. And so I'm teaching a section of the Ecology and Environmental Science capstone this fall, and all the students in this class are doing projects on rockweed and different aspects to do with this very complex issue. So we have a team that's dealing with public engagement and all of the stories that have been put out there, citizen science, any way that we can get the public involved. We have a team that's going to be doing a literature review on the ecological aspect of this rockweed ecosystem. We have a team working on the sustainability of rockweed harvest compared to a lot of the other end products that rockweed harvest gets. So rockweed often is used as fertilizer in agriculture and things like that, and so they're going to do look into how those other practices compare to the sustainability of rockweed harvest. And then lastly, we have a group that's looking into the court case and doing some more research on the science behind both of the sides that presented evidence for who should own this intertidal zone within Maine. So that's it. Sorry it was a quick talk. I have an R class at 4, and so I didn't want to go too long. But just to plug, I teach an Introduction to R class. And I'm also holding an Intro to R workshop with the library this Thursday night if you're interested in that. And we have a R lunch, which is located in the Mitchell Center just down in room 101. So if you ever need our help, let me know. But so I wanted to keep it short, but we have to thank so many people for this project, whether it be our funding agencies, so Sea Grant, the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Outdoor Heritage Fund all have given us funding towards this project. And then again, we've had collaboration from conservation agencies, government agencies, and the industry, which is invaluable. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who's been helping us with this project.
Lots of time for questions.
So you said that the study design changed from harvesting a certain height to a certain amount of biomass. Is that going to be uniform throughout the study block, or will it just be as soon as they reach that mass they're going to head out?
Yeah, so basically the way I understand it, and anyone can correct me out there understands it more, when rockweed harvesting is actually happening, I always kind of envision that they kind of go out there and stay in one spot and, collect all the rockweed down to 16 inches, but in reality that's not what's happening at all. The boats are actually, drifting within the water, and they're harvesting as the boats are drifting within this rockweed area. And so as they're harvesting, they don't cut down every individual of this rockweed. It's really just taken out in patches. And because it is such a manual, I wish that video would have worked. Because it is such a manual practice, it makes sense to not over harvest a particular area for these harvesters, because as they, start to harvest more and more, every time they throw their rake out or wherever they're driving their harvester, they're going to be getting less and less rockweed. So they really do, drift along the coast and harvest only a certain percentage of the rockweed biomass. And that percentage is going to vary depending on the conditions of the day, where they're harvesting, the slope of the actual intertidal habitat. And so, we're basically asking the harvesters to go out there and harvest like they would anyways in our particular zones that we've set out. And then we're going back afterwards and we're going to do biomass estimates using transects and quadrats to estimate exactly how much biomass was taken from that particular harvest. So it's more likely going to be, a continual gradient of percentage of harvest within a particular zone. Yep.
As mechanical harvesters are being developed and improved, as they all are, our company has 3 mechanical harvesters, and they're kind of a series of prototypes that improved on over the years. One of the important things, the reason they were designed is, first of all, to make sure that we weren't harvesting below that 16 inches. So it's kind of like a lawnmower. You can sit it there and just let it run, and it wouldn't harvest any more because it physically can't. So that's kind of like a built-in
Safety guard,
exactly,
yeah.
which is a good thing. And the other thing is the harvesters let off enough vibration so that it tends to clear away a lot of what used to be bycatch. And over the decades of having bycatch at the factory and then seeing the mechanical harvesters more, we're not having that anymore. So a lot of that is sound, vibration,
Awesome.
and just a sustainable height. So a lot can be improved through technology.
Yeah. Definitely.
Just because this is a diverse audience, could you say what you mean by bycatch?
Yes. When we're sorting on a sorting table, you are occasionally going to get some periwinkles, occasionally maybe some green crabs, what we used to call sand fleas or whatever.
Amphipods and isopods, yeah.
Island girl here, not scientist. But anyways, we have kept, when I say we, I worked for Source for a little over 7 years, but Source has been in business since 1975. We actually have records in my office going back to that. So we have bycatch records of weight, how many periwinkles, how many rocks, how many green crabs, ridiculous amounts of records. And anyway, so the bycatch has just seriously gone down in weight and what we're catching, but that's what I mean by bycatch.
Awesome, thank you. Yep, Lindsay.
Can you tell us a little bit about why rockweed's harvested and what it's used for? And do you have any data on sort of landings through time? Does that graph look like this, or is it?
Yeah, so rockweed is basically the main reason that it's harvested is for fertilizers, and then also sometimes food supplements. Everyone loves their supplements nowadays. But it's used in a lot of agricultural applications. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, the thing that's awesome about it is you know, it is sustainable for fertilizers in the fact that this rockweed does grow back. And these harvesters have been working here since the 70s, continuously harvesting and rotating where they harvest and things like that. And then what was the second part of your question?
Oh, what have total landings looked like since the 70s?
I cannot remember. There's lots of people that seem like they might have answers.
I was just going to say, anything before the year 2000, if you have to go to the DMR 27 to look at landings, anything before the year 2000, the DMR would readily admit that they really didn't give care about seaweed, and the records are very good. So it's not so well after 2000 to take that with some sort of certainty. Just another thing I want to say, on the 16-inch cutting height, I think you alluded to it a little bit at the beginning. It's not based in science at all. It's purely a compromise back from the DMR. I was looking to put some sort of regulation. I believe one group wanted 8 inches, one wanted 2 or 4. They cut it in half.
Yeah, Susan?
So it's not really a fertilizer, and that's a very important point. So in terms of colonial times and, small holding agrarian practice, certainly ascophyllum has been collected and put into the soil and so forth, and it makes things grow better. But it is not a fertilizer like you take a bag of nitrogen or phosphorus and you put it across the soil. The effect is based on very powerful plant growth regulators that are made by ascophyllum uniquely among rockweeds, possibly because it has a fungal endosymbiont. So we don't know whether this compound, which is not like any described plant growth regulator, but has some effects like cytokinins, is because of something that happens when the rockweed and the fungus are together, or if it's primarily the fungus or if bacteria are involved too. And so that's a hot area of research, especially in Canada. But extracts are made that are concentrated and at extremely dilute concentrations. They are sprayed over agricultural crops or sometimes used as side dressings. And so as our rockweed management plan details, this is done to many of the grapes in California vineyards, apple trees in Washington, soybeans in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. It is sold to Japan and internationally. And so one of the good things about that is that by increasing root mass, less watering has to be used to grow those crops. And so it's a sustainable resource when it's properly managed that has green benefits in agriculture. And there is also literature that shows that it helps many terrestrial plants and indeed some algae resist fungal and bacterial attack.
Cool. Thank you, Susan.
So, when people use the word fertilizer,
it's not really a true
gives
fertilizer.
The wrong impression of what these things
It really
are
is more
used for.
like a supplement for the plants almost with the hormones.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Oh, I think she had her hand up over here.
What qualities are used to determine a good impact site?
That's a great question for Elliot and Hannah in the audience.
So we sorry, who asked that? So when you're working with the harvesters, you're looking for sites where they are currently harvesting, and easily. And yeah, so you're kind of choosing from among the areas that the harvesters were indicating would be good areas for them to harvest, and then areas that we could access.
Yep.
Okay. First, I would like to thank Dr. Susan Rowe for the plug. Thank you so much. It's possible that the modern industry in Maine started in the 1970s, but there are records since the 1700s. When the Europeans came here, the farms, they just could not make it. The difference between a good crop and a bad crop was having the farmers go to the beach after a good storm and bringing it in. There are still farmers that they do it, so I don't know how much effort can you put in collecting about stakeholders, because there are a lot of farmers that they still go down to the beach and either actively or just the storm cast they collect. Also, there should be a couple of tons that they are harvested by the seafood people. Whatever kind of live seafood is transported, if they can, they still use rockweed. So it's not just
So like things like lobsters and things like that.
in some states, at the receiving end, they don't know what to do with it, so it's not allowed. That's regulation. But if they can, they still pack it, lobster, eels, whatever is alive. And we don't have the numbers. PMR has been able to get the numbers. Maybe with this project, you can somehow get a handle about how many tons are harvested by the seafood industry.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. And the hard part about reaching out to those harvesters that are using it for other applications is that they aren't really doing it, as one of the larger companies, and so it is hard to actually track them down and get them to work with us. But if anyone did have any information on any of those harvesters that use rockweed for other applications, whether it be putting it directly onto farms or packaging seafood with it, then we would love to have those people's contact information so we can include them in this research. Thanks.
Just as another aside, making it packing is not a good ecological habit at all, because it becomes a subject of invasive introductions, both directly in terms of Ascophyllum being tossed into the sea in a habitat where it doesn't naturally grow, and also because of other things associated with the Ascophyllum that get carried that way. And this has been a particular problem in San Francisco Bay, where there have been 3 spot introductions of Ascophyllum, but the community mobilized and exterminated it. And now there are places like around bait shops and things like that, because bait worms are often packed in Ascophyllum and shipped, where there are signs showing what it is and talking about the dangers of releasing it into the sea. I was told by one of the DMR agents about 10 years ago that someone in Washington County was trying to come up with a better packing material that sort of had the structure and consistency of Ascophyllum. And she was making some progress, and there was a cross burned in her yard. That the idea that someone would try and knock out that use for Ascophyllum was really a serious local issue. And I don't think that sentiment would exist now. We have more feeling about invasive species. But Ascophyllum has many wonderful traits, and if mismanaged or misused, some very bad ones.
Thanks, Susan. Any other questions? Catherine?
I was just going to add that there's a chart of landings in the fact sheet.
Oh,
Wonderful.
there you go. Plug for the fact sheet. Thanks, Catherine.
I promised to let Amanda get out of here in time for her next class at 4, so let's thank her again for the great.